Sarah had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. Her husband, Tom, had been working long hours at his job, and with the weekend finally here, she decided it was the perfect time to plan a special surprise for him. She'd spent the entire day preparing everything. She made his favorite meal, set the table with candles and fresh flowers, and even put on the music she knew he loved. The house was quiet and peaceful, just the way she liked it, and she couldn't wait to see his reaction. The surprise was simple, but she hoped it would make him feel loved and appreciated after such a busy and stressful week. She knew Tom wasn't the type to expect grand gestures, but she was certain he would enjoy the thoughtful effort she put into making this evening special for him. After all, they had been married for 5 years now, and though things were always good between them, Sarah felt like it had been a while since they'd done something just for fun. No distractions, just the two of them, enjoying each other's company. As Sarah put the finishing touches on dinner, she felt a wave of excitement rush over her. She couldn't wait for Tom to walk through that door and see the surprise she had carefully prepared. She imagined the smile on his face when he walked in and saw the candles flickering, the aroma of his favorite food filling the room. It was one of those moments where everything felt perfect, like a little piece of their love had been captured in time. She stood in the bedroom, waiting, holding her breath. She'd hidden herself there, thinking it would be fun to surprise him when he least expected it. Sarah didn't want to spoil the moment, so she stayed hidden, hoping to make the surprise just a little more special. She felt a little silly but excited, wondering how he would react. Would he laugh? Would he be amazed? She could already picture the joy in his eyes. The sound of the front door creaked open, followed by Tom's voice. He was home. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she stayed still, trying to control her breathing. She heard him greet the house as he stepped inside, followed by the sound of him setting his briefcase down. She smiled, imagining him walking into the room and being greeted by the beautiful dinner she'd prepared. But something felt off. There was a slight change in the way Tom had entered. Normally, he would have called out her name or asked her what she was up to. But tonight, he seemed more quiet, almost distant. Sarah frowned, trying to shake off the strange feeling settling in her chest. It wasn't like Tom to be so reserved, especially after a long day at work. Usually, he was cheerful and eager to unwind, but tonight, his movements felt more deliberate. There was a certain tension in the air, like something was weighing on him, but Sarah couldn't place what it was. Maybe it was just her imagination. She had been anxious all day, so perhaps it was making her overthink everything. She waited quietly, still hidden, but she couldn't help but notice the slight change in his tone when he entered the kitchen. She listened closely, trying to catch any hints of what might be going on. Tom had always been a private person, and Sarah respected that. But tonight, she felt like there was more to the situation than just a quiet evening at home. Something was different. The air felt heavier, as if the space around them was full of unspoken words. Sarah stayed hidden, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more she needed to understand. Was it just her nerves, or was there something off with Tom tonight? She tried to ignore the feeling, telling herself she was just being too sensitive. Still, a small, nagging thought lingered in the back of her mind. Something didn't feel quite right. Sarah stayed in the bedroom, her heart racing, as she listened for any sound of movement outside. She heard Tom's footsteps as he moved through the house, but the usual cheerful tone in his voice seemed absent. Normally, he would have called out to her, maybe asked how her day went, or even just made a silly comment to make her laugh. But tonight, there was nothing. Just silence, broken by the soft thud of his shoes against the wooden floors. A strange unease settled in her chest. She wondered if perhaps Tom was just tired from work. It had been a stressful week for him, with long hours at the office and pressure from his boss. Maybe that was all it was. But even as she thought this, she couldn't help but feel that there was something more going on. Something that made the air in the house feel heavier, as if it was filled with an unspoken tension. She waited quietly, trying not to make a sound. Her thoughts kept racing. She had never felt this nervous before. The excitement she had felt earlier, the joy of preparing a surprise for Tom, was now mixed with this odd feeling of anticipation. What was he doing? Was he preparing himself for the surprise, or was something on his mind? As she heard him shuffle around in the kitchen, Sarah found herself growing more curious. The sounds of him opening cabinets and moving things around were familiar, but there was no familiar sound of his laughter or light-hearted chatter. Normally, Tom would hum a little tune while cooking, or at least make some noise, even if he was just walking around. But tonight, everything was quiet. Too quiet. It was as if he was lost in thought, preoccupied with something that had nothing to do with the evening she had planned. The silence was starting to feel uncomfortable. Sarah's mind kept wandering back to the little clues she had noticed. Tom's movements were slower than usual, more deliberate. His breathing seemed deeper, as if he was trying to hide something from her. The usual warmth she felt when she was around him was missing, replaced by a cold distance that was hard to ignore. She waited, unsure of what to do. Should she stay hidden and give him a little more time to settle in, or should she confront him now? Her instinct told her to wait. She didn't want to ruin the surprise she had planned, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had always trusted her gut, and right now it was telling her to be cautious. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah finally heard the sound of Tom speaking. It wasn't loud, but she could make out some of the words. At first, she thought he was talking to himself, but then she realized he was on the phone. She frowned. It wasn't unusual for him to take calls in the evening, but she never thought he would be talking to someone when he got home, especially not like this. His voice was different, more serious, lower than usual. She listened more closely, trying to catch every word. As Tom continued the conversation, Sarah's stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. She had never heard him speak this way before. His tone was urgent, and the words coming from his mouth didn't sound like the Tom she knew. What was going on? Why was he speaking like this? The curiosity that had first brought her into hiding now turned into a deep sense of unease. At that moment, Sarah's excitement about the surprise faded into the background. All she could focus on now was the strange conversation unfolding in the other room. She felt like she was intruding on something private, something that was meant to stay hidden. But even though she knew she should leave, she couldn't move. Something told her that she needed to stay and listen, to understand what was really going on. Sarah continued to sit still, her ears straining to catch every word of the conversation coming from the next room. Tom's voice was muffled, but she could tell he was speaking to someone, and the conversation sounded serious. Her heart began to race as the tone of his voice became more urgent, more intense. She had never heard him speak like this before. Normally, he was calm and collected, even during stressful situations. But tonight, his words felt heavy and full of something that Sarah couldn't quite understand. "Just make sure it's done by tonight," Tom said, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if he didn't want anyone else to overhear. There was a pause, and Sarah could almost feel the tension hanging in the air. She held her breath, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to burst into the room and confront him, to demand answers right then and there. But another part of her told her to stay quiet, to listen just a little longer. What was he talking about? Who was he talking to? The conversation continued, and Tom's words made her heart race even faster. He mentioned something about needing to cover his tracks, and that everything had to be kept quiet. Sarah's stomach twisted. She felt a deep pit form inside her as she realized she was hearing something she wasn't meant to hear. Something that wasn't part of the surprise she had planned for him tonight. "I don't care how you do it, just make sure it doesn't get out." Tom's voice dropped even lower. The words felt like a punch to Sarah's gut. What was he hiding? Who was he talking to? Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. She never expected to be in this situation, eavesdropping on a conversation that seemed so far removed from the evening she had imagined. She tried to stay calm, but her mind was spinning. Tom had always been open with her, at least that's how it felt. They had shared everything, big moments, and small, and there had never been a time when Sarah felt that he was hiding something from her. But now, as she listened to him speak, she couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Was there something about him she didn't know? The conversation went on, and Sarah's mind kept spinning in 1,000 directions. She heard Tom mention something about making sure no one found out, about keeping it all under wraps. The words seemed so secretive, and the more she listened, the more she felt like she was in the middle of something much bigger than a simple surprise dinner. Was Tom involved in something dangerous? Something illegal? Her heart hammered in her chest as the thought crossed her mind. As the conversation continued, Sarah strained to catch every word. She could feel her hands trembling as she listened, the air around her thick with the weight of the secrets Tom seemed to be hiding. She knew she should confront him, but she couldn't bring herself to do it yet. What if she was jumping to conclusions? What if there was a simple explanation? Still, a sense of dread lingered in the back of her mind, a feeling that something was deeply wrong. Finally, the conversation seemed to end. Sarah heard Tom sigh, his voice tired, almost defeated. "I'll handle it," he said quietly before the line clicked off. The silence that followed felt like a heavy weight on her shoulders. She stayed in her hiding spot for a few more moments, trying to process what she had just overheard. What was she supposed to do with this information? What did it all mean? Her heart pounded in her chest as she carefully stood up from her spot in the bedroom. She couldn't stay hidden forever, but now Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to face Tom. How could she confront him without knowing the full truth? And what would she even say? The evening she had planned for them felt so far away now, replaced by a deep sense of confusion and fear about the secret Tom seemed to be keeping. Sarah stood there for a few moments, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. The silence in the house felt unbearable, thick with the weight of the secret she had just overheard. She wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Tom, the man she had shared so many years with, the man she trusted completely, had been hiding something from her. The conversation she had heard wasn't just about a small mistake or a minor problem. It sounded serious, much more serious than she could have ever imagined. She slowly moved toward the bedroom door, her thoughts in a whirl. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, and the excitement she had felt earlier about the surprise dinner now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. How could she think about celebrating when there was this much uncertainty between them? How could she focus on a simple evening when she now had to deal with the fact that Tom was keeping something from her? Something important. She took a deep breath and opened the bedroom door, trying to steady herself. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt foreign. She wasn't sure how she was supposed to act, what she was supposed to say. Confronting Tom was inevitable, but she wasn't ready. How could she bring it up without causing a scene, without making everything worse? She had no idea what he was involved in, and that terrified her. Her feet carried her quietly down the hallway, toward the kitchen, where she knew Tom would be. She could hear him moving around, but he wasn't speaking anymore. The conversation had ended, but the atmosphere in the house felt heavy, tense. Sarah felt like the air was thick with unspoken words, with all the things that were being left out. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew that things couldn't stay the way they were. She reached the doorway to the kitchen and stood there for a moment, just watching Tom. He had his back to her, standing at the counter and fiddling with a glass of water, but Sarah could tell something was off. His shoulders were hunched, his movements slower than usual. He wasn't the man she had married, the man she knew. He looked almost defeated. Tom didn't notice her standing there at first. It was only when Sarah cleared her throat softly that he turned around, his eyes widening in surprise. His face was guarded, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was almost suffocating. Sarah could feel it wrapping around her, tightening with every passing second. She wanted to say something, anything, but she couldn't find the words. How could she bring up what she had heard without accusing him, without making him defensive? Finally, Tom spoke, his voice quiet but strained. "Hey, I didn't hear you come in," he said, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to gauge her mood. He sounded normal, almost too normal, but Sarah could see the slight tension in his jaw, the way his hands tightened around the glass. It was like he was waiting for something, waiting for her to say something. "Tom," Sarah began, her voice softer than she had intended, but strong enough to catch his attention. "We need to talk." The words felt heavy in her mouth, as though they had more weight than she could bear. Tom's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a moment he looked almost afraid. "About what?" he asked, his voice guarded. He was clearly trying to hide something. Sarah could see it in his eyes. His attempt to sound casual only made the situation more obvious. "I heard you on the phone," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to hang in the air between them. She could see Tom stiffen, his face turning pale for a moment. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's heart was in her throat. She had to know the truth. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when she had just learned that Tom was hiding something from her. Something big. She couldn't let it go. "Who were you talking to?" Sarah finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. She hated how vulnerable she sounded, but there was no turning back now. The truth had to come out. Tom had to tell her what was going on. Tom looked away, clearly struggling with how to answer. The pause between them stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Sarah waited, her breath shallow, as she prepared herself for whatever answer he might give. She didn't know if she was ready for the truth, but she couldn't live in the dark anymore. Tom stood frozen, his gaze avoiding hers as he seemed to struggle with the weight of Sarah's question. The room felt eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for him to speak. She didn't know if she was ready for what he was about to say, but she couldn't hold back anymore. The questions had piled up in her mind, and she had to know the truth, no matter how difficult it was to hear. "Who were you talking to, Tom?" Sarah asked again, her voice a little firmer now, though her hands still trembled. She wanted him to look at her, to be honest with her. She needed to see the truth in his eyes, to know if there was anything he could say to make sense of what she had overheard. Tom finally lifted his gaze, and Sarah saw the hesitation in his eyes. For a moment, he seemed like he was weighing his options, trying to figure out what to say. His jaw was tight, his hand still gripping the glass of water, and his lips were pressed together as if he were holding something back. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through, and Sarah could feel her own breath getting shorter as she stood there, waiting for him to speak. "It wasn't what you think," Tom finally said, his voice quiet and strained. His words did little to reassure her. His tone was defensive, but there was something more to it, something deeper, like he was trying to shield her from the truth. "Then what is it?" Sarah asked, her frustration beginning to rise. She couldn't keep standing there, pretending like everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. "Why didn't you tell me about it? Why keep secrets from me?" The words felt heavy on her tongue, but they needed to be said. Tom let out a long sigh, setting the glass down on the counter. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. Sarah could tell that he was having a hard time deciding how to explain himself. This was more than just a simple misunderstanding. It was something much bigger than she had imagined, something that had been weighing on him for a long time. "It's not easy to explain," Tom said, looking at Sarah with a mixture of guilt and sadness in his eyes. "There are things I didn't want to involve you in, things that I thought I could handle on my own." He paused, as if considering how much to say. "I didn't want to drag you into it." Sarah felt a wave of confusion wash over her. What was he talking about? What kind of things could he be hiding that were so big, so serious, that he felt the need to keep them from her? She had always believed that they were partners in everything, that they shared their burdens together. But now it felt like there was a whole side of Tom that she didn't know, a side he had been keeping locked away, and she wasn't sure if she could ever get it back. I don't understand, Sarah said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. What are you hiding from me, Tom? She took a small step closer, but he didn't meet her gaze. His eyes were on the floor, and Sarah could see the guilt written all over his face. Tom finally exhaled, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his secret was too much to carry. I've made some mistakes, Sarah, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Big ones, and I thought I could fix them without you knowing. I thought it would be easier if you didn't find out. Sarah felt like the ground had just shifted beneath her feet. What kind of mistakes was he talking about? What had Tom gotten himself into that he thought he could handle without her? Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. She had never imagined that their life together could be so complicated, so filled with secrets and shadows. I've been involved in some things I shouldn't have, Tom continued, his voice strained. And I was trying to fix it before it got out of hand. But I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want you to have to deal with it. He finally looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with regret. But I should have told you. I should have been honest from the start. Sarah stood there, her chest tight with a mixture of anger, hurt, and confusion. Tom had been keeping something from her, something so important that he thought it would be better if she stayed in the dark. And now, here they were, standing face to face, with everything between them feeling so fragile, so uncertain. I need to know everything, Tom, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were hard to say, but they were necessary. I can't go on like this, not knowing what's really going on. I need you to be completely honest with me. No more lies. Tom nodded slowly, his expression resigned. I'll tell you everything, Sarah. I promise. Tom took a deep breath, his face pale as he looked at Sarah. There was no turning back now. He had promised to tell her the truth, but as he stood there, the weight of his secret felt even heavier. The silence in the room grew thicker, and Sarah could see how much he was struggling with what he had to say. She wasn't sure what to expect. She didn't know if she was ready for the full truth, but she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I've been keeping things from you, Sarah, Tom began, his voice shaky but determined. Things that I thought I could handle on my own. I didn't want you to be involved, to get hurt by any of it, but I realize now that it was a mistake to keep you in the dark. Sarah stood there, her arms crossed, waiting for him to continue. Her heart was racing, and she could feel her palms getting sweaty. She had always believed in their relationship, trusted that they were a team. But now, as Tom prepared to tell her whatever it was he was hiding, she felt a wave of doubt. What had he done? What kind of mistake could be so serious that he had to keep it from her? There's been something going on with my work, Tom said, pausing as though he was choosing his words carefully. Something I got involved in a few months ago. At first, I thought I could just fix it, and it would go away. But it didn't. It kept getting worse, and I thought if I kept it quiet, you wouldn't have to deal with it. Sarah listened intently, trying to piece together what he was saying. Work? What could possibly be so bad at his job that it had to stay hidden from her? She knew Tom's job was demanding, but she had never thought it could be dangerous. He worked in finance, nothing that would ever seem to lead to trouble. But now, with every word he spoke, she started to doubt the image she had of their life. What do you mean? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What's been going on? Why couldn't you tell me? Tom looked down at his hands, taking a deep breath. I got involved with some people I shouldn't have trusted. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, a way to make some extra money and get ahead. But the people I got involved with, they don't play by the rules. They'd been pressuring me, asking for more and more, and I just couldn't get out of it. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes full of regret. I tried, but it's not that simple. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had never imagined that Tom, her husband, the person she trusted most, could get caught up in something so dangerous. He wasn't that kind of person, but as the details started to unfold, Sarah felt the ground beneath her feet begin to shift. Are you saying, are you in trouble? Sarah's voice cracked as she asked the question, her mind racing. The thoughts were coming too fast, too overwhelming to process all at once. Tom hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, I'm in trouble, and I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought I could fix it, that I could make things right without involving you. But I see now that I was wrong. I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you with the truth. A rush of emotions flooded through Sarah. Shock, fear, disbelief. She could barely understand what Tom was saying. Her mind kept going back to the conversation she had overheard, to the way he had been speaking to someone on the phone. She had no idea how deep this went. She didn't know how far Tom's involvement in this situation stretched or what the consequences might be. I don't know what to say, Sarah said, her voice shaking. How could you hide something like this from me, Tom? We've been through so much together. You should have told me. Tom stepped closer, his face full of regret. I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah. I thought I could handle it alone, that I could fix it and never have to involve you. But I see now that I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have been honest with you from the start. The air between them was thick with tension. Tom's confession had shattered the foundation of trust they had built over the years. Sarah didn't know what to believe anymore. Could she really trust him again after he had hidden something so huge from her? Could their relationship survive this? I need time to think, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the weight of the words as they left her lips. She didn't know how long it would take to process all of this, to understand what it meant for their future. But she knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. Tom nodded slowly, his face filled with regret. Take all the time you need. I'm sorry, Sarah. I never meant for any of this to happen. As Sarah stood there, facing the reality of what had just been revealed, she felt a deep sense of uncertainty. The man she had married, the man she thought she knew, was not hers. Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she tried to absorb everything Tom had just told her. The air in the room felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of his confession. The trust she had in him, which had been the foundation of their marriage, was now in pieces, scattered like broken glass. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The man she had married, the man she thought she knew so well, was involved in something so much bigger and darker than she could have ever imagined. Tom had tried to explain himself, tried to make her understand why he had kept this secret, but the words didn't feel like enough. How could he have hidden something so serious from her? How could he have thought that she wouldn't need to know, that she wouldn't want to share in the burden of whatever it was that had gotten him into this mess? The questions swirled around in her mind like a storm, each one more overwhelming than the last. I don't know how to fix this, Sarah, Tom said, his voice breaking the silence. He was standing a few feet away, his posture slumped, as if the weight of his own guilt was too much to bear. I know I've hurt you, and I know I've failed you, but I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I swear. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes still filled with disbelief. I don't even know where to begin, Tom. How am I supposed to trust you again after everything you've kept from me? How do I know this is the truth? How do I know you're not hiding even more? The words stung, but they were the questions she had to ask. She needed answers. She needed clarity. She couldn't just let this go without understanding exactly what had happened and how deep it really went. It wasn't just about what Tom had done. It was about what it meant for their life, for their future. Could they move forward from this, or was the damage already too great? Tom's face crumpled with regret. He could see the pain in Sarah's eyes, and it hurt him more than anything else. He had never meant for any of this to happen, never intended to pull her into a mess like this. But now, standing before her, he realized that he had done more than just hide a secret. He had broken her trust, and that was something that couldn't be easily fixed. I know it's hard to believe me right now, Tom said softly, his voice full of sorrow. I don't know how I can make it right, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll get help. I'll fix whatever needs fixing. I don't want to lose you, Sarah. I can't lose you." Sarah didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to forgive him, wanted to believe that he could fix whatever was broken. She had always loved Tom, and the thought of their life falling apart because of one mistake felt impossible to accept. But another part of her, the part that felt betrayed, couldn't just forget what she had overheard, what he had kept from her. The pain of not knowing what he had been involved in, of not knowing if she could trust him again, felt like a weight on her chest. "Tom, I don't know if I can just forget about all of this," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. "I need time. I need time to figure out what I want. I can't make a decision like this right now." Tom nodded slowly, his face full of understanding, even though it was clear that the pain of hearing those words hurt him deeply. "I get it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll give you all the time you need. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." The room was silent again, the weight of their words hanging between them like a cloud. Sarah sat there, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. Part of her wanted to believe in Tom, to trust that he would make things right. But the other part, the part that felt betrayed, was afraid. She was afraid of what else he might be hiding, of what else had been kept from her. Could she really trust him again? Could they ever go back to the way things were before? As the silence stretched on, Sarah realized that there was no easy answer. This wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild, and whether or not she could ever forgive Tom for what he had done was something only time would tell. For now, all Sarah knew was that she needed space to think, to process what had just happened. The road ahead was uncertain, and the future felt like a fog that she couldn't see through. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure where their journey together was going. All she could do was take one step at a time, hoping that the truth would guide her toward the right decision. The days that followed felt like an endless blur to Sarah. Time seemed to slow down, stretching out in front of her like a long, winding road that she wasn't sure she was ready to walk. Tom had respected her need for space. He didn't push her, didn't try to rush her into making a decision. But that only made things harder. The silence between them was deafening. It wasn't the comfortable quiet they had once shared. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, filled with so many unspoken words, with so many questions that Sarah didn't know how to answer. Sarah found herself going through the motions of daily life, but everything felt different. She would wake up in the morning, make coffee, and eat breakfast as if nothing had changed. But inside, she felt like a part of her had been torn apart. The trust she had in Tom, the trust that had been the foundation of their marriage, was no longer there. It wasn't that she hated him. It wasn't that she didn't love him. It was the fact that she didn't know who he was anymore. The man she thought she knew had kept secrets from her, and those secrets had changed everything. There were moments when she missed the old Tom, the man who had been her best friend, her partner in everything. She missed the late-night conversations, the shared laughter, the comfort of knowing that they were in this together. But every time she thought about how much she missed him, the conversation they had had, the painful truth he had confessed, would creep into her mind, and the walls she had built around her heart would grow even higher. She found herself thinking about the future, wondering if it was even possible for them to move forward. Could she forgive him for what he had done? Could she ever trust him again? She didn't know. The answer wasn't something that could be found in a single conversation or a quick decision. It was something she would have to figure out on her own, and that scared her more than anything. One evening, as she sat on the porch, staring out at the sunset, Tom came outside to join her. He had been giving her space, respecting her wishes, but she could tell that he was feeling just as lost as she was. The pain in his eyes was undeniable. He was trying. Sarah could see that. But the question was it enough? Could it ever be enough? "I know you need time," Tom said quietly, sitting down beside her. The warmth of the evening sun touched his face, but it did nothing to ease the coldness that had settled between them. "But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Sarah looked at him, and for the first time in days, their eyes met. She could see the sincerity in his gaze, the regret, the desire to fix what had been broken. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. It was a start, but it wasn't the end. The road ahead was still long, and Sarah didn't know if she was ready to walk it with him. "I don't know if I can ever get back to where we were, Tom," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can trust you again. This has changed everything." Tom's face fell, but he didn't say anything. He didn't try to defend himself or make excuses. He just sat there, quietly, as if he understood that this was something she had to figure out on her own. And maybe that was the hardest part. Tom had made his mistakes, and he was trying to make amends, but Sarah had to come to terms with the fact that the trust they had built together had been shattered. She had to decide if it was something worth rebuilding, or if it was better to walk away and let go of the life they had once shared. Over the next few days, Sarah spent time reflecting on everything. She thought about the life she had with Tom, the love they had shared, the memories they had made. She also thought about the future, about what she wanted and needed in a relationship. And as much as she still loved him, she couldn't ignore the fact that the foundation of their marriage had been cracked. There was no easy answer, no simple fix. But as she sat with her thoughts, Sarah realized that healing, whether it was for her or for her marriage, would take time. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired overnight. It would take patience, understanding, and perhaps a lot of work. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. But she wasn't sure yet if it would be with Tom or if it was time to go in a different direction altogether. For now, all she could do was take things one day at a time and trust that, eventually, the answers would come.